So these are some of my recent gesture drawings. I love gesture drawings, quick, simple sketches that capture the pose. A lot of it is not just feeling stuff, right? Like being intuitive and feeling the rhythms of the pose. A lot of it is pretty concrete. A lot of it is things that you can measure, things you can hold up your pencil to even. So I'm going to recap those things. We've gone over them on the channel before, but I'm going to recap those really concrete, clear-cut things. I'm going to do that in a few minutes, and then we'll get into, I think that covers about 80% of gesture drawing, but then we're going to get into the final 20%. And that is a bit more vague. That is a bit more about feeling it, right? And it's harder for me to, talk about the feeling part of this because I like to be more concrete and clear cut. But that final 20% is also really important. So first, let's get to the really clear cut, concrete things. So when you see a pose like this, one of the first things to check is the relationship between the head, the rib cage, and the pelvis, right? So in this case, the head is a little bit off to the side, and it's also facing to the side, whereas the rib cage and pelvis are facing towards us, so there's a bit of a twist happening at the neck. And then when you think about the rib cage and pelvis, the rib cage is coming down on this angle, whereas the pelvis is coming down on that angle, right? So they're at different angles, and that creates a squash at the midsection on this side and a more stretched out other side. We have a squash and a stretch. Once you can see those things, and by the way, those are all really clear-cut things. Like to find that ribcage angle, you hold up your pencil to the middle of the chest, the sternum, right? So you can just see that the ribcage is on this diagonal. And then to see the pelvis angle, you could just hold your pencil up to the angle between the belly button and the crotch. That often roughly gives you that pelvis angle. And then you can just see how it's all squashed up on this side of the midsection, whereas it's more stretched out on the other side. These are concrete things. These aren't vague, feel the rhythm, feel the flow, cool run-ins type of vague advice. This is really clear-cut stuff that you can build your gesture from, right? Now, once you've got that in your head, you can push those ideas a little bit, right? So that's what I've got here. I've got the head pushed a little further across, right? The pelvis angle is a little sharper than it really is, a little bit even stronger of a rib cage to pelvis angle change. And that, if I draw it this way, it's going to make a stronger squash and a stronger stretch than the real one. And what's interesting is often you do have to push these things a little bit in the drawing just to capture the pose. You got to exaggerate it a little bit. You don't have to change the pose, but you just push those angles a little bit to make it a bit more interesting. So at this point, you've seen the big squash and stretch. It's tempting to try and really draw everything in the figure that you're seeing. So let's say these are all the different little points that we're seeing on the figure. And we're kind of noticing, let's say we try and connect all these dots. We're going, oh, it goes like this, then it goes in like this, then it comes out a little bit like this, and it goes from each dot to each dot that I'm picking up on. We don't want to do that in gesture drawing. We want to cut through with bigger, simpler marks. So we want to cut through this with a big, simple C-shaped curve. The most complicated that we would want to get is an S-shaped curve, so maybe something like this. But you don't want to be getting into really convoluted lines that kind of wiggle about, trying to capture every contour. Now, this doesn't mean that you need to basically draw stuff that really isn't there. You don't really, sometimes I see people trying to do a gesture and they're just finding these big curves that don't match what the pose is actually doing. So here's an example of some big, simple C-shaped curves, straight lines, maybe a few S-shaped curves that pretty much cut through most of those dots without finding every little bump and undulation, right? We're trying to keep it asymmetrical. Notice how they're really focused on that squash and stretch created by the relationship between the head, the rib cage, and the pelvis that we started off with. And then often there's a lot of asymmetry between the sides. So let's say on this arm, there's a little bit more complexity on this side, but then it's very simple on the other side. We've got very little symmetry. So in the thigh, you could go for curves that kind of look like this, but those are too symmetrical. So we find ways to make those curves asymmetrical on each side. And that is pretty much the sort of more concrete, clear-cut set of ideas that you need to capture your gesture drawings. And then there are some mindset things that you can start to bring in, and I'm going to go over a couple of those that I've gone over before, and then we're going to sprinkle on the final ingredient that we haven't really talked about before, which is the most sort of intuitive and feeling based of them all. So here is a demo of me drawing this pose, but I'm really just thinking about those concrete ideas we just talked about. I'm just trying to make sure that I get, asymmetrical curves, that I make sure it's balanced, that I make sure that there is a squash and a stretch. And so the drawing ends up pretty good, I think, as a gestural drawing, but it lacks some energy. It's a little bit stiff. And that is because my mindset, I did this on purpose. I was like, let's do this drawing without the gesture drawing mindset in place. And the gesture drawing mindset is what the rest of this video is going to be about. Because I think gesture drawing is like 80% about those more concrete ideas we talked about earlier. And if you haven't yet got confident with those ideas, I would focus on practicing those. But once you start to gain a bit more confidence with those ideas, that final 20% that makes a really nice difference at to elevate your gesture drawings and really bring some energy to them and some life to them is more about the mindset as you're drawing. So here's another drawing. This one, I really tried to draw the verbs I was seeing. So I'm going to explain that in a second. And a lot more went wrong with this drawing. I made a lot more mistakes, but I also think it had a lot more life and a lot more energy to it. And so I actually decided to take it forward and like paint on it digitally quickly. And so the end result was this, and I really enjoyed it. But it really does make a difference to draw the verb. And it's a phrase I first heard from Walt Stanchfield's book, Drawn to Life. And when I read that book, I didn't understand it and I wasn't ready for this idea. And so it just frustrated me. I'm like, okay, so what? I draw, this person is reaching forward. So I draw reaching. Like, how do you draw a verb? It doesn't make any sense. But I think now I really understand a little bit better. So here's how it goes. So here's a baseball pose, right? And I'm like, okay, so what? Draw the verb, like draw the throw. So when I'm looking at this pose, I don't want to just copy down the outlines that I'm seeing. Like now I'm drawing the arm, and because it's a gesture drawing, I'll draw it with a big simple curve, but I'm just drawing the arm. What I want to do is I want to look for what is happening in this pose visually. So visually speaking, the outline from like his one arm through to the other arm, it's sweeping over in a big like arcing movement. And I want to see that. And then I want to ask my arm to draw that big sweeping movement. And that is really different, right? That's a really different idea to I want to match the outline. Because when I'm just trying to match the outline, even if I'm trying to simplify it, my arm can easily get caught on trying to accurately copy it. Whereas if I ask my arm as it's drawing to draw the movement that I'm seeing, to draw that sweeping action, then I'm much more likely to do a big fluid sweeping movement that's full of energy. And so when I see a squash and stretch on the squash side of a torso, I can see how the one line, the one big simple curve comes up and then crashes into the next one. And I can go, okay, draw this one sweeping up, but then gets caught, crashes into the next one. Or when I'm drawing the asymmetrical curves going up a leg that I'm looking at from the front, I can go, okay, draw a C-shaped curve here and another C-shaped curve and another C-shaped curve. Or I can say, look, these curves flow into each other and kind of counterbalance each other. So draw that the way that they flow into each other and draw that counterbalancing. And then I ask my arm to capture that. Instead of drawing a leg and using asymmetrical curves, I've already got those ideas in place because I've practiced those ideas a lot, so I'm quite used to them. And then when it comes time to draw, I'm like thinking in terms of verbs. Now, I know that this could be frustrating advice, just like when, you know, when Mr. Miyagi was giving Daniel-san advice and it's kind of vague and it's like, Daniel-san's like, just tell me how to punch and kick these bullies. That's what I need. I need concrete, clear-cut information. But Mr. Miyagi wanted to impart more deep, meaningful advice that gets to more fundamental ideas.
Karate here. Karate here. Karate never here. You understand?
This Walt-Stanchfield draw the verb idea, it really is powerful. It really is effective. But I would suggest that if you're not sure what I'm talking about, if that seems frustrating and annoying to actually implement, you may just need to keep practicing those more concrete, clear-cut, analytical ideas I mentioned earlier. And you know, keeping going is one of the main things. Like if you're watching our channel and you're watching channels like mine, then you're probably practicing in quite good ways. But then the other ingredient to good practice is the quantity. You need quality and quantity. And very often I think students get frustrated and they say, why am I not way better because I'm practicing the right way? And I'm like, well, you just need to do another 100 practice sessions. You know, you just need a lot more reps. So if you are trying to like be, you know, look like, have abs like Bruce Lee or something, and you're doing sit-ups and you're like, I've done 10 sit-ups, I did them the right way, why do I not have abs like Bruce Lee? It's like, because you probably got to do a zillion more reps to get those abs. You know, that might be a bad example, but if you would like to really get good at those more fundamental ideas of seeing the ribcage pelvis and head relationship, we have our Fresh Eyes mini course. And then if you want to keep building on that and build your gesture skills and all that kind of stuff, we have our study group. If you want to see your drawings progress consistently every month, I really recommend checking out our Life Drawing study group. Every month, we pick a fundamental skill or an area of anatomy to study together. We have live lessons, we have exercises, and we have co-drawing sessions where we hang out and practice together. The impact of this is massive. It really transforms your ability to draw the figure. It's a ton of fun. We've covered a lot of interesting topics so far. Light and shadow, gesture, edges, all kinds of different topics. So I really recommend checking out. This is what it looks like inside. Right now we're working through heads and how to draw heads for figures. So the links for all this stuff are below, and I'll see you in the next one.